All right. Well, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're very excited to have you here. We're very grateful that you've made the time to come learn more about the Palm Beach TPA and your service on our governing board. This training, we put it together because there is a requirement to serve on our executive committee, if in the future you'd be interested, to have received a training and more understanding about what we do. And that can be done by going to the a conference of MPOs nationally, to the MPOAC Weekend Institute. However, due to the pandemic, there hasn't been that opportunity in some time. So staff, especially Melissa, did a great job putting this together along with some of other staff, put together a training to kind of be able to make up for that and provide another opportunity. So that's the goal of today, but also we really want all of our board members to be engaged, understand what they're doing here. You know, we are a planning agency, so we don't have authority. However, it's a very important role to really collaborate together with all our municipalities to advance the transportation system, safety, connectivity, and it's a very exciting time right now in our county with all the growth we're experiencing, and especially things moving forward from the south, Broward and Miami, that are really part of the same urbanized area. So lots of exciting things, and we're really glad that you're here and grateful for your time. So thank you. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Melissa to take it away. Thank you.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. I know you are all very busy, have very busy schedules, but we really appreciate you taking the time to be here today and learn more about the TPA, especially being hopefully interested in potentially serving on our executive committee and being a little bit more involved with the agency. So we are going to go over a couple of items here today. On this agenda, you can see the outline of what we will be talking about. It'll be myself, Andrew, and Brian, our two deputy directors. So we'll start with what is an MPO. A lot of people don't really know what an MPO is. You all obviously are a little bit familiar with that, but we want to take a little bit of a dive into what an MPO is and how they started. We'll also be going over who we are here at the Palm Beach TPA, our governing board and advisory committee structure, how they work together, how they work with staff, and what they do during their regularly scheduled meetings, as well as our core work products. So our TIP, our LRTP, all of those acronyms that you hear all the time, what are those and what do they mean to you? Our key initiatives, so things like Complete Streets, Vision Zero, not necessarily things that are required that we do, but things that we choose to do because we're passionate about making our streets safe for everyone. Funding, obviously a very important topic. So where do we get our money from? How do we use it? And where does our board come into approving all of those things? Public participation. So what does the PR team do? How do we get the public involved with the TPA and giving us feedback, giving you feedback about the transportation planning process, as well as regional coordination. So one thing Valerie likes to say a lot, as well as our other staff, is we're one traveling public. So we work very closely with Broward and Miami-Dade counties, as well as the state of Florida, to plan transportation. So it's not just us here in Palm Beach County, we're really working together to make sure that we can plan accordingly. So we'll start with what is a metropolitan planning organization, or an MPO. So back in the 1940s and 50s was when the Interstate Highway Program was created. You'll see on the right side of the screen is a map of the national system of interstate and defense highways. This was when it was first created, when we were first starting to look at creating those opportunities for highways here in the United States. So at the time, the main reason that we needed to create interstates was for national defense, for commerce and trade, getting goods and services moving across the country, as well as economic activity and job creation. Then in 1956, the Federal Aid Highway Act was passed. This established the Highway Trust Fund from the federal fuel tax. We'll get a little bit more into that fuel tax in our presentation a little bit later on. But one thing that's really important to note about that is that the states and not the cities were the ones who were determining the interstate plans. So for example, in Florida, the state of Florida was determining where those interstates were going. City of West Palm Beach, the city of Boynton Beach, the city of Boca Raton didn't have a say at all in how those interstates were created, where they went. And that created some destruction of communities. So if you look at this map here, it's kind of a before and after in the Overtown neighborhood of Miami. This is one that's really popular for as an example of showing what happens when we create these interstates and essentially go through neighborhoods, bulldoze them, and then create highways. So this is an example of 1955 to 1980, showing the construction of Interstate 95. In the Overtown neighborhood, there were 12,000 residents, most of them Black, who were displaced due to the construction of Interstate 95. And this is from Segregation by Design, which is a really interesting site that shows these before and after photos of not just highways, but also whether it's like, you know, buildings that had gone up, high rises, things like that, that took out entire neighborhoods. He focuses a lot on Miami, but there's also a lot of other neighborhoods that he's shown some before and afters for across the country. And he's doing some work now to actually show the Palm Beach County area as well. So also back in the 1960s, the cities were taking over transit services to avoid bankruptcy. And that's because a lot of people were moving out to suburbs, abandoning privately run transit services, but states didn't want to be involved in transit. So the cities were the ones who took them over. They needed help though, so they turned to the federal government. And that actually came from the Housing Act of 1961. So housing money was going into these urban areas, which could support transit. And this does still continue today with repairing rail, rolling stock, et cetera. And this also supported metro level planning. So this is kind of the first, bless you, look at metro level planning. This hadn't been done yet, so it's still kind of a new concept. Then in 1962, the Federal Aid Highway Act was created, which was the 3 C's: continuous, comprehensive, and cooperative. Those are things that we still do here today. The focus was creating transportation planning and transportation in general that we work together on. We are not just doing it for ourselves here in our city, our county, our state, but working with others to create a transportation system that works for everyone. And then in 1964, very important Civil Rights Act was created and passed, which for transportation is very important because it creates fairness in issuing contracts, not abusing neighborhoods when you're planning transportation facilities, and mandates non-discriminatory conduct in federally supported programs. And then one acronym you probably hear sometimes when talking about transportation planning and projects is NEPA, which stands for the National Environmental Policy Act of 1969. And this is a really huge part of transportation planning. It essentially requires us to consider the environmental impact for transportation projects when we're going through those. Yep, go ahead. Yep, 1969. And then on the right side of the screen, this Andrew showed me this. This was COTRAN, which is Palm Beach County's transit system from 1980 to 1996. So this is a look at one of their buses when they first started rolling them out in 1980. So just a fun little photo to share. In 1973, as you can see, there's kind of a theme here with these federal aid highway acts. This was when metropolitan planning organizations were mandated. And there's a couple reasons for this. One of the main ones is because, as we talked about with transportation planning, specifically with the interstate highway system, the states had a lot of control, but the cities and the urban areas did not. So this was the way for urban areas to really say, we have a say in this, we have some control. And MPOs were mandated for urban areas with more than 50,000 people. The TPA is actually considered a TMA, which is a transportation management area, due to our population being more than 200,000 people as defined by the census. But that's just a little side fact for you. Also in the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1973, a portion of highway trust fund dollars is going to start being allocated to MPOs for planning. So this is how we get our money in the beginning to do transportation planning. It's coming from those highway trust fund dollars. And then in 1991, the Intermodal Surface Transportation Efficiency Act is created. This one is where the government says, okay, you exist as an MPO, but we need you to start doing specific planning documents, having authority for decision making. So that's where all of our plans come into place with things like our TIP and our LRTP. We needed to write things down and make them required from year to year. And it also gave MPOs, as I mentioned, a little bit more authority to make these decisions, to have a seat at the table and say, we want our voices to be heard. You'll see the MPO, this is the first one I could find, but the MPO logo from 1978, just wanted to share that with you guys. There's been a couple rebrands over the years, but that's the earliest one I could find. And then these you're probably familiar with. These are more recent, of course. The FAST Act of 2015 was a 5-year reauthorization bill that added a couple things into transportation that weren't there before. So freight is now considered a priority. We now have to do performance measures, which at the last board meeting, that was what Andrew talked about, what you all talked about for quite some time. This is a requirement that we need to do in order to plan our transportation system, taking a look at things like bridges and roadways and seeing how they're doing, how we're doing. It also transferred funds from the general fund to the Highway Trust Fund. And the reason for this is because in the year 2015, we're starting to see a lot more electric vehicles. We're starting to see not as many people using vehicles that would contribute to the federal gas tax. So we need another way to fund this. So we're now transferring funds from the general fund over to the Highway Trust Fund to supplement that. And then, of course, in 2021, November of 2021, the bipartisan infrastructure law was passed. This was the largest transportation investment in our nation's history, which included $550 billion in new investments. So on top of, I believe it was $600 billion of investments, all of these were new investments. So things like transportation, of course, that's all of those grants that we remind you about at board meetings and in our newsletters, things like the Safe Streets for All grants that several municipalities were awarded, water, broadband, energy. It has a lot of investments, not just transportation. So what is an MPO after hearing all of that? So we work, as I mentioned, with Broward and Miami-Dade counties, and we'll get into that in a little bit, but mainly we work with our 39 municipalities in Palm Beach County, as well as our partners that you see on the bottom of the screen. So Palm Beach County, the Florida Department of Transportation, specifically District 4 here in Palm Beach County. We work with PalmTran, Tri-Rail, Brightline, the airport, the port, lots of different partners, and not just transportation related. We work with economic development community. We work with, all kinds of people who can bring their expertise to the table to talk about how we should move people in Palm Beach County. And then that's where you come into play. The TPA is a federally designated agency. So we are an MPO, but we call ourselves the Palm Beach Transportation Planning Agency. So we're doing business as the TPA. You are the TPA as the board. We support you as staff, but the TPA is the governing board. You're also supported by our committee members and other public stakeholders. And you are the ones who are giving us input into the transportation planning process. So we really look to you to give us information about what you want to see for your constituents, for the county as a whole, when it comes to transportation. So this is our mission and vision. I feel like we really drive this home with you guys a lot. We've said it a million times, but just want to share it one more time. We collaboratively plan, prioritize, and fund the transportation system, and our vision is a safe, efficient, and connected multimodal transportation system. So we want to work together to plan the transportation system and do it in a way that makes sure everyone can use it safely and efficiently. We prioritize more than $600 million of federal, state, and local transportation dollars to implement projects every year. So that's a lot of money, and that's why we need your help to oversee all of that. As I mentioned, you're supported by staff and 3 advisory committees, and you're really setting that big picture framework for these transportation decisions, helping us kind of look at it from a bird's eye view of what we want to see today, what we want to see in 5 years, in 25 years, and even further out into the future. You are the ones who are giving us direct authority for our plans and programs. So we appreciate all that you do, and we really look to you for that to make sure that we're doing our jobs every day. Now, when we talk about our governing board and advisory committees, this is a look at our current governing board, which you're very familiar with. Our chair is the mayor of Palm Beach Gardens, Chelsea Reed, and our vice chair is Commissioner Maria Marino of Palm Beach County. We are made up of 21 locally elected officials, and we also have one non-voting member who is the secretary of FDOT District 4, Jerry O'Reilly, who's not pictured here. We have 3 advisory committees. The technical advisory committee, they're the ones mostly made up of planners, engineers, people who have that technical expertise and can really look at those plans that we share with you to give us information about maybe something we missed, a different perspective that they might have. So that's kind of their role. And then they give recommendations to the board based on their insights. The Citizens Advisory Committee, the way that I like to describe it is that they're the ones who ideally don't have a transportation background. So they're looking at it from an everyday perspective, someone who uses the transit system, someone who drives their kids to school, who drives themselves to work, who uses pedestrian and bicycle facilities with their family. And then our Vision Zero Advisory Committee, previously called the Bicycle Trailways Pedestrian Advisory Committee, now VZAC. They are keeping our Vision Zero action plan, which we'll get into a little bit later on, really at the forefront of their decisions. So they are mostly oriented around pedestrian and bicycle safety, but also looking at it from an entire perspective as well for the transportation system. Our Transportation Disadvantaged Local Coordinating Board focuses on the needs of those who are disadvantaged. So older adults, people with disabilities, people with low income, children at risk. We have lots of different members on our LCB who represent those communities and those populations, working with Palm Tran Connection to make sure that we are taking a look at how that system is running and making sure that those people are being served. Yes. Thank you.
How do we determine who is on that LCB board?
So Greg here actually is our liaison for the LCB. We do have on our website, I believe it's palmbeachtpa.org/LCB, all of our members listed there. So the LCB works in a little bit of a different way than the TAC, CAC, and VZAC. So we don't necessarily have members appointed by, say, the city of Boynton Beach. They represent specific populations. And if you're interested in learning more about that, our chair, Mayor Reed, actually does serve as the chair of the LCB as well. Valerie, go ahead.
Yeah, and I'll jump in. So as Melissa mentioned, the Technical Advisory Committee and the Citizens Advisory Committee are required committees that we have to have. Vision Zero is more of a best practice that we have. The Transportation Disadvantaged Local Coordinating Board, we administer that as part of a grant that we received from the Commission for Transportation Disadvantage from the state of Florida. We are currently selected as the designated official planning agency. That's normally in many cases MPOs are. We used to not have that grant, but we are serving as that, and it's almost like a third party that's evaluating Palm Tran, who is the community transportation coordinator, who receives dollars for operations from the state for TD service. So we're like a third party board with a set of, the state has set who those members of that board is. So it's specific, like area of aging. We do have someone who's from the disabled community, but it's like specific agencies that have to be on that board. And so it's more of a directive from the state for this grant that we received to serve as that designated official planning agency. And some of the things that they do as well is we have to do an annual evaluation. We have to work with of the service of the CTC of Palm Tran. We have to do Palm Tran Connection. We have to do a transportation disadvantage service plan with them. And so there's certain grant things that we have to do to make sure that they're doing a good job with the funds that they're receiving. And the chair of that local coordinating board has to be an elected official from our board. So currently it used to be Mayor Grant. Now it's Mayor Reed. And so that's kind of it's a little different from the other advisory committees that see things that are going to, before they go to our board, we bring them to these other advisory committees. The TD LCB is a separate kind of board entity. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so
Melissa, sorry,
Yes.
one more thing. I know that we have a quiz at the end, but I don't want to add any layer of stress, which I've, heard on like what that is, because I see everyone scribbling like and taking notes fervently, which is great, but I don't want that to be like a stressful experience. So I'm thinking we should just pass that quiz as like an open book kind of thing to kind of pay
okay,
attention to while we're going through. If that works for you guys versus at the end, you don't know what to expect. Yeah, but yeah, please take notes and we want you to absorb as much as possible. We just don't want it to be a stressful experience with not knowing what to expect at the end. So we'll go ahead and just have that with that's awesome. Yeah, it's just so
it's
that
only
you
10
have that.
questions, so
And
it's
that
not
way,
that
yeah,
hard.
so that's just something to turn in at the end of this. You will have a little more time to think about it at the end of the training, but we just to verify and validate that this was a training and you had some key takeaways. We do have those there. So thank you.
Okay, yes, go ahead.
Sorry, can I ask one question just before we move on from the transportation disadvantaged? I'm wondering, in terms of planning, how exactly does that board fit in? Is it just basically projects that we're already looking at, or is someone, let's say, for example, looking at from Palm Trans saying, okay, there's not a stop at this, location in West Palm where there's a growing need for it, and we should add one, or we need a new kind of mobility service for that neighborhood? Or, I mean, is it very specific, or is it mostly just about things that we already have in place?
It's completely separate from the TPA in the sense of like our tip and all those things that we do. It's specifically focused on the transportation disadvantage funds to run Palm Tran Connection that the state gives Palm Tran as part of the CTC evaluation and as part of the whole, the process and the collaboration, all that. We're obviously working with them, the transportation disadvantage service plan. All of that goes into that consideration of we evaluate the people who serve on that board. The evaluation just kicked off. Greg's leading that with the board members. They have to go ride the service. They have to call riders and be like, what are things that your challenges that you're having? And all that goes into this evaluation to tell them, provide recommendations to improve, but also it's kind of like very focused on just that paratransit TD service, on how to improve it, how to try to provide more options to, alleviate that system and find efficiencies or educate people on how to ride the fixed route system, because it's expensive to provide these one seat trips everywhere, like one ride trips. So trying to like move people over. So it's completely different from like what we do as an MPO. It's related, but it's like they're like in their own like specific things that the grant wants us to evaluate of Palm Trans service. We actually just had a public hearing about it this week, right? Yeah, 2 days. So.
Good questions. Okay, so almost done with just kind of the introductory slides here. We wanted to touch on Robert's Rules of Order. As elected officials, I'm sure you're all very familiar with this, but this is something that our committees also have to use as well in their meetings. They're not elected officials, so a lot of times it's something that could be potentially new to them. And really what this does is it allows for communication styles to work together. It is not a law. It's just a set of guidelines that we follow, that most government bodies follow in order to conduct their meetings. And there are 5 types of motions that can be made during a meeting. The main motion being related to the specific agenda item at hand that you are discussing. You can also make a substitute motion, which does happen sometimes during your meetings, where you say, hey, we want to make a motion about something, but not what you're recommending. You can also table things so that you come back to it, postpone it for a specific date and time moving forward, or reconsider it. And then, of course, amendments do happen as well in order to, like I said, with substitute motions, kind of make that more in line with what you are recommending as a governing board. So again, not a law, just a standard for facilitating discussions and group decision making, making sure that you all have a way to conduct your meetings, that the chair can do that efficiently, discussion happens in an orderly way, and things like that. And then lastly, I wanted to mention before I move on to Andrew that the operating procedures is something that is very important for our staff here at the TPA, as well as our governing board and committees. This really shows us what we can do here at the TPA, whether that's meeting guidelines, emergency powers, if something comes up that needs to be acted on before a meeting or in between meetings. You can find all of this on all of the board and committee pages. So for you, if you go to palmbeachtpa.org/board, it's right there. We update this often to make sure that it's in line with what we're doing. We, over the past couple of years, have added things like virtual meetings and stuff like that. How do we conduct those? Because that wasn't something we were necessarily doing before. And always good to take a look at this, maybe refresh yourselves if you haven't looked at it in a while, and make sure that you're up to speed on all of those procedures. And with that, I'll hand it over to Andrew Euler, our Deputy Director of Programs, to talk about those core work products and acronyms that you love so much.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So I'll be going through the core work products we have as a metropolitan planning organization. The ones I'm discussing on the screen here are all ones that are actually required for metropolitan planning organizations. There's the Unified Planning Work Program. So that's our 2-year planning document of activities that we do as staff. Our long-range transportation plan. Those are both required for any MPO in the nation. The list of priority projects, which feeds into our transportation improvement program. The list of priority projects is a state requirement for every MPO in the state. And then the transportation improvement program, that is another federally required document. So these are all of our planning core work products. There's also one more required document that Melissa's going to touch on later on, and that's how we reach out to the public. So with our public participation plan. So our Unified Planning Work Program, this is our 2-year operational plan and budget for the TPA. So this outlines all the activities and the money going towards each activity that we do as a metropolitan planning organization. And this is really our application for federal grant funds and to be reimbursed. So all the activities we do day to day, for example, this educational training today, that is a budget item in the Unified Planning Work Program. So it includes what our deliverables is going to be over the next 2 years, who's involved, so how much is being spent for staff, how much is being spent for our consultants, when those will occur, and then how much and what are the funding sources of that. A side document that we also do annually that is really honing in what we're doing on the Unified Planning Work Program and really focuses our attention for the year is a strategic plan. This isn't a required document, but it follows the same categories and structure that we have for our Unified Planning Work Program. And so staff develops this and it goes to our executive committee and then goes to our committees and you all the board as well, which really sets a focus for the next year on what we want to accomplish. And so this is a little bit above and beyond and really focuses that Unified Planning Work Program. And we started doing this back in fiscal year 2017. So the first major document we have for our planning purposes is our Transportation Improvement Program. So this is our 5-year, multi-year intermodal program of transportation initiatives in the county for our urbanized area. And so it includes every project that's going to happen that has federal and state funds on it within our county. This is updated annually. So this comes to us, the first time that you all will see this is in a draft form around May, and then the final form in June. And then we adopt that and we start with that in July 1st of the new fiscal year. We're operating under a new transportation improvement program. This is a fiscally constrained document. So it has the updated budgets and funding sources for the next 5 years. And then it's fully programmed all that available funding towards projects. And this document must also be consistent with our long range plan and then local comprehensive plans and local transportation and modal plans. So a little bit more about the TIP. A product not listed in the TIP cannot receive federal funds. So this is one of the bigger teeth that a metropolitan planning organization has throughout the country, and you all have at the TPA, that if you're pulling a project that has federal funds on it from the TIP, that product will not go forward, right? So when you have major products that the state may be doing on I-95 or other state roadways, or even products that we have that aren't on the state roadways that have federal funds attached to them. Pulling that from the document would ensure that the product could not have federal funds on it. So that's really one of the bigger teeth of what an MPO can do when it comes to the programming of those federal funds. It also includes all the products to be funded from the state transportation trust funds. So these are all the state funding sources that the state has to put towards priorities on the state system. I'll talk a little bit more about funding later on, but every product that has state funds is also included in the Transportation Improvement Program. And this document's also consistent with the FDOT work program for the state. And they're both actually very consistent at a point in time. And I'll talk about that in a moment. But they're both consistent statewide. So every TIP in the state and the work program are all consistent on funding and the projects when it comes to those federal and state funds. And lastly, what we really tried to do at the TPA, which can be a heavy lift at times, is we try to include every single local project that we can find that has local funding sources that don't have federal and state funds on it, and include them as informational products within the Transportation Improvement Program. So we're able to do that with the county's 5-year road program. So all the products that are in that, we bring into our TIP for informational purposes. We map those, they're available online. Those aren't products that we have direct control over. And we don't always have the best status update of those, but we try to provide the full comprehensive list of products in the county happening over the next 5 years. And so what's in our Transportation Improvement Program? It's billions of dollars of the 5-year program. We separated out into our major initiatives for the TPA on our state roads and our major projects, our local initiatives program, and then our transportation alternative program. These make up our TPA priority list. Then there's also those major FDOT priorities on their strategic intermodal system. So those major roadways within the state that they're trying to improve efficiency, travel time, and other modal needs. And then there's additional products that are the local ones that we include, as I mentioned. And there's also the airport, railroads, and seaport projects. And then lastly, you'll see a lot of the operations and maintenance when it comes to both transit and the roadways. So what does that look like for our county? It's right now $3.6 billion in programming over that 5-year time period. The majority of this money is really in that major strategic intermodal system, $1.5 billion for that. So that includes I-95, the Turnpike, Beeline, all the interchanges along those. So that's a really big bulk of it. And then there's also a lot of money really more towards the local funding side and the state funding side when it comes to operations and maintenance. And so this is where it can get a little complicated, but how we get to developing the Transportation Improvement Program, it's not just something that pops up over a month. It's really a long journey to get into an approved Transportation Improvement Program. So in this next coming cycle, when we talk about the next one for fiscal year 24 through 28, which will be our next TIP, we really start product development now. So we started product development earlier on from our long-range transportation plan. And so we're identifying products for that. And then that feeds into the list of priority projects, which is our request to FDOT to fund priorities that we have as the TPA. And again, that's broken down into our state roads, our local initiatives, and our transportation alternatives. And then FDOT uses that and vets those projects and uses our priority list along with their priorities to come up with their final work program. And then the committees and board have that opportunity to provide their comments and endorsement to this work program. It's called a draft tentative work program. And so this is really the first look at how it's shaken out for the next 5 years. And then a few months later on, once they receive all the input, they're releasing their final work program. And that's where the final work program and our TIP are consistent. So we build our final TIP based off their work program. And just to touch briefly on how products sort of get programmed, the timing of products when they come into the work program and our transportation improvement program. I'm not sure if we gave them the handout today on the product phases of a product, a roadway map. Okay, well, we have a good brochure on our website for that explains this in more detail about how complex it can be sometimes for a product over the time period that it is first as a conception of a product all the way to construction. So I'm providing a few examples in a table about different product scenarios and how those might play out. So we have the transportation improvement program that we're currently operating under. So it's 5 years from 2023 to 2027. And then anything past that is considered long range. So that would be something like in our LRTP, our long range transportation plan. And so that's from 28 all the way out to 2045 right now. So many times these phases take multiple years to complete. And so they are spread out over multiple years. So for example, in the first product, we have design that might start in 2023. And then you'll see right away, if it's required, 2 years after that, and the construction 2 years after that, right? So just alone for that one that has design right away construction could be a 5-year period. Another example for product 2, maybe one that requires a product development and environmental phase, which is getting more into federal regulations and having to do a deeper dive into the product concept before they even go to design. This is one that we actually had at our last board meeting with Atlantic Avenue. A product like that might be being PD&E may start earlier, and then you'd have design start after that, potentially 2 years after that. And then again, you're going through those different phases of right of way and construction. So products can really take up to a decade at times if they're large enough.
Andrew, just to clarify, because there's a pattern here with PD&E, the project development environment, then there's preliminary engineering. Obviously, before any of this, there's probably a planning phase, a planning study, potentially feasibility, and then you really get into the real deal of actual PD&E, project development environment, preliminary engineering. I'm just wondering, the project 3 at the bottom didn't have the PD&E. Is that just for you to clarify for everyone? Is there always PD&E and then PE, or how does that?
Sure. Yep, many products may not require a PD&E. That's something that's gets more into if you're going to have like major right-of-way acquisitions or other major environmental factors involved in the product. It's going to impact a lot of homes. Maybe impacts the environment. Those sort of things have PD&Es. A smaller project that doesn't even get outside the right-of-way might only have a design phase and then a construction phase, right? So those smaller products that locals apply to us for transportation alternatives, that's really only going to have a design phase and then a construction phase 2 years later.
Okay.
So those definitely have a shorter time frame. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. So one of our funding programs is the transportation alternatives, which is only 3 years out, but it's typically like pedestrian and bicycle facilities. It might just be like restriping the road so that now you actually have a bicycle lane, and so something that's not that complicated may not have that environmental and like all this other type of analysis, because it's just you're kind of doing something that's not that disruptive.
I have a question. Yes. What is the very first stage before the planning? I mean, when it's an idea, how does the idea start? Who starts the idea? And
Sure. That's a good point. A lot of the ideas can originate from our long range transportation plan. So during that update, when I'll talk about in a few minutes here, during that update, we are reassessing all the needs for the area. So some of them can originate from that. There's a lot of other studies that go on throughout the years that might also bring about additional needs and concepts. For example, we identified the 561 corridors in our long range transportation plan based on a high level needs analysis when it comes to which places would garner the most ridership, where are people living, working, playing, and commuting. So from that, we went to the study phase for US 1, and we also did the study phase for Oak Tree Boulevard. So products are originated out of that. And then we have additional things that maybe the municipalities are doing with mobility plans or other ideas in their capital improvement plans that they want to bring forward. And so those are another place that we have ideas pop up. We do get them from elected officials as well. Yeah.
It might be, so that's a great answer. So for example, in our long range transportation plan, looking at, okay, in the future, if we were to have a more frequent, efficient, dedicated transit system, we identified that vision of the 561 plan corridors, which was like, as Andrew mentioned, these are corridors that are currently high ridership for Palm Tran. They have a lot of people and jobs along them. These would be good candidates. So it's just a vision. After that, we did US 1, as Andrew mentioned, and we just finished Okeechobee and State Road 7, which was just a planning vision study. Now that FDOT is an FDOT roadway, so they're like, now that we took it to that level and kind of did this visioning and planning, they're like, okay, looks like you're serious about this. They're going to program, they've programmed now 2 million in feasibility, which doesn't even get into here yet, but that's like because it's that one's especially very like transformative, that what we're envisioning. It's kind of like, well, they're like, this is our road, so we're gonna really take a more deeper dive into the modeling and all whatever, where would the manhole go and how would like all the things. So, and then once that happens in that particular study, because we're proposing something so grand, it's other things will have to happen, like a local funding source to be able to fund, because we fund capital, but not operations. So to fund more frequent service to match that. So that's kind of, but to your question, where do these ideas and things come from? It could come from a local, like the city might have a bike ped master plan or something, and then they're looking at what do we want to prioritize? Or for example, we a lot of times have meetings with our local municipalities for when we do a call for projects for our funding programs, which unfortunately they are years out. The TA, transportation alternatives, is 3 years out. Local initiatives and other ideas are 5 years out. But for example, in Green Acres, we said, listen, you have this school here, we're looking at a map, our interactive map, our resources, you own all of this right away that's just grass. And people are living in this gated community. They have to basically walk or bike 1.5 miles. Why don't you just do a shared use path? Because it's your property. You have the space there. We did this with City of Lake Worth Beach too. You have just all this rubble and grass here and you're not doing anything with it. For our transportation alternatives, which is money on or off the roadway system, you can do a pathway, do a shared use path there. And now the kids can connect and it takes them 5-10 minutes to get to the school versus into the park versus having to get on Jog Road and deal with 6 lanes of traffic. So it really, the idea can come from anywhere. For us, it's usually guided by our LRTP, but for these other kind of more local funding programs where we do a call for ideas, it might just be like someone noticed that there was an opportunity, like, oh, look, there's a missing bike lane from here to here. Maybe we apply to the TPA and see if it fits, and then we apply as a project,
And the last thing I'd mention on this is, especially for larger scale projects, I mentioned that the work program and our transportation improvement program really tries to fund every dollar available for the next 5 years. And so that means that a lot of new phases for product happen within the new 5th year. And you'll hear that term a lot, the new 5th year. That means whatever the next outer year is going to be. So in this example, on your last product here for product 3, let's say this was a new one that was a priority. If FDOT's the one, and it's going to be on a state road, and FDOT's the one administering this product, they may not start design for the new 5th year because there's no, they're looking at their work capacity and what they can handle as staff, and then also where money's available. And so a lot of times that's why you'll see design start in a new 5th year and construction a few years out. We do have a few programs such as the Transportation Alternatives Program where we are able to get construction funds in an earlier year, which is great because the locals can do the design. So there are caveats to that, but a lot of the major products really start in the back. Sure. Yep.
I have a question. Thinking about Boynton Beach specifically, we will be experiencing a period of growth. Obviously, West Palm has been on that train and for a while. But for cities that are a little bit behind on that are kind of catching up to that, is there any fund that could be provided for programs such as having like a trolley, or, since these projects are many, many years ahead of time or forward in time, how can we maybe plan for that? Or is that something that the TPA could fund, or is that something that has to come from city funds specifically?
Sure. There are a few programs out there, like as I mentioned, that would be a few years earlier on in the process. Depending on what it is, there's other avenues that maybe you can go after certain discretionary grants that are available out there that we can assist with, that are at the federal level or even at the state level. Something specific for trolley, there's a few options out there that are not 5 years out. If you're just looking for like operational funds, I think they're just a few years out, but. I don't know
Yeah,
if you wanna expand
we
on
at
that.
the TPA, unfortunately, we can't fund operations, and also our funding for projects is that we're prioritizing is Federal Highway Administration, so surface transportation funds. We are able to flex funds to FTA for transit capital, but they have to go, not operations capital, it has to go to an FTA designated recipient, which is SFRTA Tri-Rail or Palm-Tran. So we did 1 year try to say, what if we were to flex the funds over to FTA and have them go through a designated recipient, one of these transit agencies, and then there could be a city that's a subrecipient that gets the funds to get the trolleys. But unfortunately, every project, we still have West Palm Beach lingering, but every project that a few cities went after that and tried to do that, and none of them ended up following through because of change of leadership, because it was 5 years out, because of whatnot. With West Palm Beach, we actually flexed the funds. They were like, yeah, we're going to do it. And we're still trying to figure out a way for them to do it. So we're not doing that anymore, like moving forward, because it was just a lot of like trying to make it work, and then it didn't work for anyone. We're hopefully that we can still make it work with West Palm Beach, but yeah.
Well,
But we're gonna make it happen. Yeah. But we're in terms of like, unfortunately, local circulators, enhanced transit service, anything that's like operations, maintenance, like the circuits that are going around here, those on-demand things, those are not through us. That's more there might be other funding opportunities now with the federal government doing things, but it's also tricky because with these monies that are state and federal dollars, they have to go to public right away, to a public entity. There's a lot of hoops and things involved. So most cities usually come up with a different funding structure to pay for that kind of stuff. Like here in West Palm Beach, the CRA, the DDA, other people kind of pay into that, or potentially there might be like you're paying through your parking fees or something like that. Like you're finding another way to pay for those, and you might have a shorter contract. You might be like, we're going to go with 3 circulators and see how it works. And then if not, we're done with you,
Okay, so just curious, do you happen to know like how the West Palm circulars are paid for? You said it was by the CRA and.
Oh, good.
Could you turn on your microphone?
Valerie, you probably know more than
Yeah,
I do.
so it's paid through like fees from the developers and different people that are taxes that are in the downtown. But there's also there might be a vendor that says, we'll come, and do you allow us to come? And it's like a private vendor. Like, I'm not sure Rose Trolleys, they're a new one that's kind of popped up. I'm not sure if they're funded by city funds or if they're just kind of another vendor that's around and people can download the app or call them and get a ride.
They're not funded by the city right now. I hope that they will be at some point. I mean, we're looking at our trolley service and how we're going to restructure it and maybe incorporate both circuit and Rose Trolley and the fixed routes that we have. But there are some other grants that I know that I was recently sent by, you should talk to Wendang. She seems to know all the grants for this kind of thing. So yeah, that might be helpful.
So it's usually, and a lot of cities here in South Florida have now partnered with these local circuit or Freebie, a lot in Miami and Broward, and here in our county, we have Delray and West Palm. And then Brightline, they have their shuttles going around too, but those kinds of more on-demand partnerships with private, companies and other things are more local, usually local.
And just last thought, the reason why I'm asking, it's because, as we grow with development, a lot of times developers are making arguments when I have meetings with them of like, oh, well, we don't need that much parking. Maybe your code is antiquated and, back in the day you needed this much parking, but now you probably don't. So I don't, just trying to figure out who's right, who's wrong. And at the same time, like my specific constituents on the west side of the city who I represent in my district are literally majority senior citizens that are retired. Some of them, many of them drive, but if, they've specifically asked at town hall meetings, like, can we get a trolley to go, from the west side of Boyd to the east side, which is, is going to be where we're building our downtown. And knowing that parking might be an issue in the future, how do we prepare for maybe the idea of, maybe we could call it a trolley, or we could call it whatever, any sort of, alternative modes of transportation to make sure that we don't have the roads so congested, getting people from the west side of Boynton Beach Boulevard to the east side.
Definitely. Yeah. I think the model that there's two kind of options. One is, I know you guys are working on a mobility plan, but it's looking at potentially these on-demand local circulators, because the trolleys, some of the cities are moving away from that too, because it's a large vehicle and there are usually like a couple people on it. So like Delray Beach, they were like, we don't want this big thing going down our street, and it like also has exhaust, and the people are like complaining in the restaurants and whatnot. It's more like it looks cute, but it's, how many people are really using it versus like an on-demand, which then you have to teach the people how to use and get them to use it. But like the on-demand, local circulars were like, oh, I just download this app and I say, come get me, and they come and it's free. And then I go over here and they go there. So that's like something that a lot of cities are moving towards, because they're more nimble and flexible, and you can just go around in a certain zone. So here in West Palm Beach, when they first started rolling out, it was interesting because the people on the island definitely learned about it, because I was like, well, these people are just coming over like for brunch and then going back, and then, just going around on the local circular. So you download the app, you see the zone, and then there might be other options to use it if you don't have a phone and whatnot. So that's definitely, I would probably try to look at some examples, or we can provide you information, connect you to those folks for those to learn more. And then also working with the I think transit agencies are now, I know Palm Trans looking at, I think they're talking to Riviera Beach, Royal Palm Beach, a couple of different people trying to also like figure out, do we need to be taking this really big bus around here? Or maybe we can have a local, like an on-demand zone of local circulators in this area that then takes you to the main line, but in just like a area that it doesn't make sense, so they're also looking at on-demand, potentially models of hybrid things going on. So.
To want to remind everybody, we're gonna fall behind on schedule, so. That helps. Yeah, thank you.
There's a half an hour for the exam left at the end, in case you.
I just wanted to chime in, because I think like for us, for like Boca Raton right now, because of the Bright Line, there's like different things going on. So our area that we refer to as BRIC, which is our innovation design area, they have their own like shuttle services in LURB and APOC and BRIC, and they're looking at different things like in BRIC, because it's 1.8 million square foot of office. That's where the IBM was housed. They're even looking at autonomous vehicles in that area. So there's like a lot of different things going on. So I think like when you look at the city, there'll be different modes because there it makes sense to have more shuttles, because people are getting off the tri-rail to get to their destination, versus the downtown. Now the Bright Line has their own circulator that only goes to Meisner. But we as a city are starting to look at our budget, because we want to get people to come downtown and to be able to be on transit modes. So
yeah, it's super exciting. I actually got to test the autonomous vehicle that they've launched there. The autonomous vehicles are very exciting, and people are like, oh my gosh, the autonomous vehicles. There are still a lot of safety hurdles that haven't been passed. So they can only run on roads that are up to 25 miles per hour. They have to have someone still in them. There's things like that, but there's definitely communities like Tradition or Lake Nona areas that are rolling those out. And it's in a location that's kind of like a business hub. It's like a really good place to roll something like that out. I just wanted to mention, we haven't announced the dates yet, but we're planning to do like an educational workshop with panelists, experts on mobility this spring here, to talk about all the latest and greatest mobility innovations and solutions, and how tools that cities can actually, take with them and do with that. So we'll be letting you know. And we're also doing another one. We haven't announced it yet, but on transportation, land use, TOD, transit oriented communities, and transit oriented development on May 5th here as well. And it'll be really good because we'll be talking about the challenges that you're talking about, because people are like, how can I increase density without having, like, it's a linear math equation. One space per two people. And so now I have this big building, I have to have a ginormous garage. Meanwhile, there's like, as you get more urban, you have to start thinking about using that equation, all of downtown West Palm Beach would be a parking garage. So Miami a few years ago, 10 years ago, started saying no parking requirements. Some buildings just like not providing parking. And people are just like, well, maybe I won't have a car, but you have to provide other options for them to get around.
Okay, so moving on to the next document that we have that's required. We're almost done here, but this one is the one that's required for the state of Florida for every metropolitan plan organization. This is not something the federal government actually has as a requirement. So this is unique to Florida, and this is our list of priority products. So this is the one that's we give to AFDOT to feed into their work program that's going to build our transportation improvement program. And what you'll see in the list of priority products is an example of the summary table. This is for local initiatives program, but this list of priority products summary table is the exact same table you're going to see in the work program draft, and then the final transportation improvement program. So we try to make it a consistent document through those consistent tables through those three documents. And really the only thing that changes is the funding amounts and the status of those. So that way it's easy to track our priorities over time. So when you open the TIP document, you'll see this list of priority products as one of the first few tables. Next is our long-range transportation plan. And so the long-range transportation plan is really setting a vision for the region, for our urbanized area. It lays out the policies and strategies, and then finally the projects to achieve it. So it's really looking at what are our needs, which are our major priorities, are they consistent with all the community's needs, and then how are you going to get these projects funded? And the requirement for an LRTP is for at least 20 years planning horizon. Here at the TPA and many of our partners in Florida all have a 25-year planning horizon. So our current plan is the 2045 LRTP. And then our next one for our 25-year planning horizon, which actually we just started a kickoff with, is for our Vision 2050. So you'll be hearing more about that over the next 2 years as we build that plan. The LRTP considers all transportation modes. So it's all roadways, transit, ped, bike, freight, it's ports, airports. So it considers all modes and all types of needs. And it also reflects our requirements for federal planning factors and state planning factors. So Melissa mentioned these transportation bills and these other transportation acts at the federal government that outline specific things you should be looking at. And so in those are planning factors that we're required to bring into our LRTP. The plan is also fiscally constrained, so it balances the total cost of products and desires, and it's constrained to the actual amount of money available. And then it's performance-based. And what that means is that when we set our targets and our vision moving forward, that we are measuring the performance of how we're meeting those moving forward. So what we talked about performance measures at our last board meeting, that's really getting at what this is about. So it's programming the dollars to meet your targets. And we update this every 5 years. Some more state requirements on top of just the federal requirements include giving emphasis to facilities of national, state, and regional significance. So the state has their transportation, their strategic intermodal system, also known as the SIS. Again, that's that major roadway network within the state, and it also includes our major ports and airports and rail lines. So all those must be considered in our LRTP. The state of Florida also has their own Florida transportation plan. So their statewide transportation plan that has to be incorporated into our LRTP. And then we're also required to be consistent with local comprehensive plans and what the communities are looking at locally. So with that, the way that sort of works out is that when we have these policies and initiatives in the LRTP and also the product lists, we're working with you all in your communities to ensure they are consistent. And if they're not consistent, what sort of mechanisms do we have to come to agreement on some things. And lastly, we coordinate with our other MPOs and the state on these documents. So when we talk about Martin County, St. Lucie County, and then also the partners to a South Broward and Miami-Dade to ensure that our regional transportation products are coordinated together. Okay, now I'll turn it over to Brian Ruscher, who's going to discuss our key initiatives that we have for the TPA.
Good morning, everyone. Brian Ruscher, Deputy Director of Multimodal here at the TPA to discuss with you the key initiatives of the Palm Beach Transportation Planning Agency. These are the initiatives that are derived largely from our governing board and from our plans that Andrew just went through. So I'll go through these in specificity, starting with Vision Zero. So we're fortunate enough to have council members or commissioners from each municipality who has already adopted Vision Zero as a goal. This is, of course, a commitment to zero traffic fatalities and serious injuries. We say that because we want no person to be permanently injured or have their life altered on our roadway system as a result of a traffic-related crash. This puts the system's responsibility onto both designers and policymakers, including planners, engineers, the media. All of us must hold ourselves accountable to how we collectively are using our ways to get around communities. The TPA originally adopted a Vision Zero action plan in 2019 and updated that action plan in 2021. And we proactively work with our partners on implementing that action plan. What does Vision Zero look like in reality? Maybe it's what's pictured on the screen here, a child using a marked crosswalk in a residential community wearing a helmet, safely using our system. What Vision Zero in reality looks like and the challenges that we face are more like what's pictured on the screen. To protect the innocent municipality who has this major roadway that runs through it, I want to say that Vision Zero isn't just about people out biking. It isn't just about people walking. It's also about people who choose to drive and accommodating their needs, because this roadway is also accountable to those users as well. People using this roadway are seriously injured driving all the time. So it's not just about people walking, it's not just about people biking, it's about providing safe means for everyone to use and engage with our system. Now, some of the challenges that you might face on this roadway while walking or biking is not being able to cross the road for every half mile. When you do choose to cross the road, you cross a 45-mile-per-hour speed limit, 5 lanes of traffic. So you're dealing with a pretty rough challenge using our roadway system. That's why we've adopted this goal, because we do believe that there are ways to engage with our roadway system, to design it appropriately, and to be able to move our people in a safe, efficient, and connected way. Now, why Florida? Unfortunately, we have been ranked number 2. Previously, we were number 1, but that's not anything to celebrate, because in these rankings, which are published every year by Smart Growth America, all municipalities and major metro areas are getting worse. There are 11 in Florida of the top 20 most dangerous areas to walk. And locally in Palm Beach County, our fatalities continue to rise, as envisioned in the screen. Again, people walking, biking, and driving are seeing more fatalities across our roadways, regardless of the location, regardless of the municipality, and regardless of who owns the roadway. So we all must hold ourselves accountable to this vision and aspirational goal of zero traffic-related fatalities and serious injuries. Yes, Commissioner Fox.
Can I just ask a quick question? I mean, obviously there's nothing to brag about. Of course, what you're saying that we're number 2, but when you look at all of these areas that are the worst, it's like California and Florida, do you think primarily due to weather related because there are more pedestrians probably year round, or I'm just curious if.
No, because the Smart Growth America organization actually creates an index to control for those factors. So it's not simply a byproduct of weather-related use. People are using the information and transportation system. We've designed our entire country around, one design manual for streets and highways, and there's not really a lot of distinction between them. So we have to think more critically about how we are making choices and investing into our transportation system. And I'll get to that in a little bit further in our slides. So go ahead, Valerie.
And I just want to add, as you see, a lot of this is in the Sun Belt. And so something we learned in planning, but the federal government invested and subsidized a lot of highways and aligned with when the southern states started becoming growing. And so basically these other states further north, such as like Boston or other places, also were not built so much around the car. So when that happened and I believe it was safety Lou, right?
Iced tea.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there's been
Federal-
several rounds of like investment that the federal government said, let's just invest in like a ginormous highway system everywhere, just big roads and interstates and all this. And then there was a move from where the downtowns, people left downtowns and they went to the suburbs. And in the Southern Belt states, the Sun Belt states like Arizona, Florida, all Texas, all of this, we had a lot of land to do that and just kind of expand and build giant roads. But now over the decades, we've learned that that doesn't work. And now people are not healthy. They like get in their car, drive somewhere, then go back into their garage and never interact with anyone, sit on their couch and just eat, and then aren't active. They don't live in communities. They don't interact with people. And then they're just all stuck in congestion. The sprawl continues and continues and continues of this like endless madness. And we've learned also widening roads just induces demand and then they're full again. California, there's studies, they widen the interstate even further. And within 5 years, it was deadlocked, jam packed again. So now there's a national movement trying to retrofit suburbia, trying to bring back the downtowns, trying to create connected communities, complete streets, get people on transit, stop sprawl, all of this, and the safety thing that came along with it, as Brian showed that picture. It's like moving from just moving cars to moving people of all ages and abilities, and the equity factor and the access factor, all of that we all know, but we're struggling with having to like change that mindset, retrofit, and it's hard to change and it's hard to, but it's not, it's like a doomed path to think that we're just going to get out of it. You can widen sometimes, but then at a certain point you got to start changing, and it's not one magic wand that fixes it all.
So as I had said before, we're fortunate enough that all the commissioners and council members who are in the room have already taken this initiative at their jurisdictional level. And we are actively expanding the number of municipalities and agencies which are looking at Vision Zero more seriously. There are obviously other jurisdictional owners who are very important missing from this list, we are working with on getting their Vision Zero action plans in place. Notably, Palm Beach County did receive a Safe Streets and Roads for All to create a Vision Zero action plan. So in that vein, we are working proactively with a number of different communities, including 4 others from Palm Beach County, on implementing a Vision Zero action plan for your communities, which is one of the key elements in the principal approach to Vision Zero. So it starts with a political commitment. We see this starting with a resolution frequently at your council or commission level. This starts with you as the leaders in your communities who have a responsibility to your stakeholders to be able to ensure that everyone can safely move about your transportation system. And from that, you are actively involved in this process of creating an action plan, ensuring that your city is collaboratively and cooperatively working with the Florida Department of Transportation, who owns many major roadways in your community, and that you're looking at this from a systems-based approach and creating redundancy so that if there are flaws in the roadway system, people have safe options to get around that. Now, complementary to Vision Zero is Complete Streets. Complete Streets is about creating roadways that are appropriate and respond to the context and land use around them. Those roadways are then designed and operated and enable safe access for everyone using them. It includes pedestrians, it includes people biking, it includes people driving, and people using transit. Pictured here on the screen is a graphic that the Florida Department of Transportation has created in light of this effort. We recognize that we have, if you talk about the spectrum of Palm Beach County, look at the screen. It goes from agricultural to urban core. These are the transects that we deal with and that we see within our county by and large. Where you're located now in the urban context, we've talked today about parking. We've talked today about micromobility solutions. These are the types of things that you can expect to see in this context. But as you go west in Palm Beach County, these systems become less and less viable because we've designed our roadways to accommodate higher speeds, which might present conflicts for those types of modes. However, it doesn't make it infeasible. So take a look at the screen and see what's going on with Lake Worth Road and being constructed right now. So through a resurfacing project that the Department of Transportation had created for routine maintenance, the Transportation Planning Agency worked with local stakeholders and FDOT to come up with a concept for protected bike lanes. So you'll see a continuous separation for turning movements that protect people in the bike lane. You see wider sidewalks, landscaping, crosswalks, which is very important because this is a high transit ridership, high pedestrian activity corridor, while also still accommodating the people who are using Lake Worth Road to go east and west in our county. But you don't have to look at complete streets from the big picture. You can also look at it at the small picture too. Think about A1A and the town of Jupiter and what they've created. This is one of the most pleasant streets to walk, bike, or drive on. I challenge all of you, if you have not been on A1A North, using any mode, try it out. It's beautiful. They have street trees for shade. They have designated bicycle lanes with traffic calming through chicanes and mid-block crosswalks to get across the street. And of course, wider sidewalks. So again, responding to the context. Sure. I think we have someone taking a picture. Got it. And I believe we will post these slides or make the recording available just in case somebody misses something. So we talked briefly about the benefits of complete streets from engineering design, maybe a little bit about health. Obviously, there are other benefits as well. So on that corridor that we just pictured, A1A North in Jupiter, there is consistent redevelopment that's occurring from dilapidated structures going into multifamily housing, new types of uses that are going in along the corridor. This street enables safety for those communities. And let me tell you how. So who here has heard of crime prevention through environmental design? So that is a strategy that police typically look to urban planners and designers to reinforce, because what we're asking the street to do is to put eyes on the road. People driving are less likely to report crime. They're less likely to see crime happening. People walking and biking are more likely to stop and to report things that are out of line. So crime prevention through environmental design is a benefit from complete streets that happens. Additionally, those people who are walking and biking are more likely to stop and shop in your local stores. They're likely to engage with places that have a sidewalk cafe. So you have an economic benefit. We've talked about the health benefits, of course, and there are safety benefits as well. So I know Valerie wants to jump in because she's really proud of this graphic.
Yeah, we created this in-house actually. Annie, who left to go work for Boca Raton and then unfortunately left there and on to other things, but she created this. She was an FAU grad. But I just wanted to point out, and kind of in addition to the more people on the streets, the design of like having, like, think of some of the neighborhoods that just have a giant garage in the front of the house and no like eyes looking out the windows. Also having more of like that, the windows and people being able to like look and see on the street and people feeling safe because there's people around. There's less crime in neighborhoods in communities with complete streets. Brian mentioned more healthy communities because now people are actually able to walk and bike around and be able to get active transportation, do exercise. There's actually studies that show that in these types of communities, students have better grades because they actually are like, they're doing exercise, they're getting out. It's better for the environment because you're actually maybe doing some mode shift. People that might have had to drive, now they're like, oh, I'll just walk, I'll, bike over there or whatever. So the majority of trips actually are between like 1 and 3 miles. So a lot of the congestion sometimes that we deal with is people that are just driving around, going to whatever Publix, their friends dropping off their kid at school or doing things that maybe could have been done by walking or biking. And so, but yeah, there's environmental benefits as well, economic benefits, safety, all the things that Brian mentioned. So.
Sure. So, I mean, there's lots of information and resources out there. On the slide, it says for every $1 you invest in your transit system, you get a $5 economic return. For every $1 in a bike lane, you get $3 in economic return. But I mean, I'll just go ahead and say, like, we put a lot of emphasis on school age children and school age safety. We have a certain walk or bike zone that this is established where you don't get bus support. But yet, we also don't have a lot of safe facilities for children to use our system. And when they walk or when they bike and they get that recommended physical activity throughout the day, they're more likely to learn and they're more likely to be attentive in school. This is for children who are dealing with developmental disorders and children who are, your standard run-of-the-mill students that are using our system. So it's very important that we think about these systems in these contexts and how it can help solve some of the issues that we are seeing throughout the county as we continue to grow and as we continue to change, and as we continue to urbanize in some areas and not be so urban in others.
I want to mention just two more things, sorry, on that graphic. One, just a point of interest. So we've been pushing for shared use paths because they're like separated from the road, and also they just are really all ages and abilities. But having a bike lane like what we're showing here, which is a buffered bike lane, it's not a separated bike lane because there can be a separated with actual physical separation, but having a buffered bike lane or a bike lane, which is usually a bike lane itself is usually 5 feet buffered, it's at 7 feet. There are people that want to ride faster and they just don't want to deal with like the dog and the kid and all the things on the sidewalk or other things going on. The majority of crashes with bicyclists actually do not happen in bike lanes. They happen people that are not following the rules of the road. They're riding across the middle of the street, or they're on a sidewalk that's not wide enough, and they are going too fast, and they have a crash because they lose control and there's a pedestrian, or they're going to crash in cars when they pull out on a driveway to connect to the street. They usually pull out all the way to the curb to look. And so the people, when you're walking, you have more reaction time. If you're riding a bike fast and the car pulls up, that's when those crashes happen. So contrary to what people might think, not the majority of crashes do not happen in bike lanes. However, when you're trying to invite more people to bike versus, drive, majority of people the perception may be like, I don't know, I'm not going to ride in a bike lane. So there's people that are like, don't put the bike lane, it's not safe. And that's not necessarily true. It may not be inviting for all ages and abilities, but it's better than nothing at all, because the worst is when you're trying to bike and your bike lane ends, and then you're really stuck with all the cars in the middle of traffic. So our Complete Streets workshop, which we'll be having next month, will go into much deeper dive into all this, but it's obviously something we're passionate about. So thank you.
All right, so we're going to zoom out and look a little bit broader at policy and talk about how we coordinate between stakeholders. So within the 2045 long-range transportation plan that Andrew mentioned, and that we are going to be doing an update with our staff led by Nathan George over here on the opposite side of the room, we have identified a series of corridors called the 561. We have identified a plan which includes the 561 corridors. So 5 north-south, 6 east-west, and 1 unified transportation system, which provides enhanced walking, biking, and especially transit facilities. In the future, so looking out to 2045, if you look at the screen and you see that blue shade, that's where about 95% of all the non-farm jobs are going to be located, and about within 2 miles, about 70% of the population. So if you think about the growth that we're experiencing now, think about the future. Where are these people going to be living? And where are they going to be playing? Where are they going to be working? Most of it's going to be occurring within this geographic area. So moving people on our existing major corridors where our roadways are largely built out, not necessarily in capacity, but built out for enhanced transit and other services to get around, will be incredibly important. We developed this in line with Palm Trans Transit Development Plan, which is the effective way that Palm Trans is going to increase its services and route performance for its end users. So these two plans came together to form these 561 plan corridors to provide enhanced transit. You've already likely seen work done for US 1 through the US 1 multimodal corridor study. You might have also seen work done on Okeechobee Boulevard, which just wrapped up and you heard about in our December governing board and committee meetings. And why this is important is because we need to think about the spatial implications of what we're doing. Many of our roadways are built right up to the edge of the right of way. We don't have any more room. We can't move any more people in cars. So if you look at the picture on the screen, you see 60 people in the option of a bus, 60 people with the option to use a bike, and 60 people with the option to drive alone. Now, obviously, there are some efficiencies that are had here, but if we think about the growth that we are going to experience in 2045, we did for our 2045 plan, we envision growing from 1.5 to 1.9 million people. I can guarantee you that number is probably going to rise in 2050. We have undertaken a massive increase in population since the pandemic. That number is going to probably be even higher. So if you look at Okeechobee Boulevard, just for an example, it's fresh on all of our minds. 138,000 people use that corridor every day, just going within that corridor between State Road 7 and Okeechobee Boulevard. About 50,000 are leaving the corridor, about 100,000 people are coming into that corridor. So that corridor is tapped for automotive capacity. We don't have any more room. What we know is that automotive reliability is waning. We need to think about these corridors differently. So as I said before today, as Andrew alluded to, we invest about $1.7 billion in roadway capacity for the next 5 years, which is pictured in the map on the left. But what we're getting from these roadway capacity improvements is about 1,000 lives lost every year. And I can guarantee you that if you ask people, they don't believe that congestion is getting any better, but yet these massive investments are not returning the benefits that they're seeing. These investments also prioritize vehicle speed, which makes it harder for people to walk and bike on a system which we really can't do very much more with. So we need to think differently. And in 2035 or in 2050, maybe we could think about incorporating accommodations for all users and enhancing transit. So this is one of the concepts which we envisioned through our multimodal corridor study for Okeechobee Boulevard and State Road 7. The light rail transit has the potential to move about 8,600 people a day. And it guarantees you a 47-minute ride from the Wellington Mall to downtown West Palm Beach. Obviously, there are trade-offs with this. You know, putting a new vehicle out onto the system has construction trade-offs. It might have some trade-offs in time, but you have to think about how we can prioritize safety and convenience for everyone. The individual driver being king, it can only last for so long without inconveniencing everyone. So for that, I would encourage you to engage with us as we look forward into the 2050 plan, and we look forward to adopting more of these things and looking at our mobility vision and looking at how we grow. Because if we all continue to drive alone, we can all expect to be in congestion alone. Now, on the map on the left, you see our 561 corridors and the types of service. And we are growing this vision to incorporate more areas of the county, which could include things like express buses and could include different types of services such as micromobility providers, bike share, trolleys, maybe new types of tri-rail service or others. And we'll need your engagement on this front because we can't plan alone. As we've heard, planning is cooperative, comprehensive, continuous, all of the C's. So please do continue to work with us on growing this mobility vision and thinking about how we can move people differently throughout areas of our county. And I think if Valerie wants to chime in on before we get funding.
Thank you, Brian. So yeah, in our last long range transportation plan, we identified that network of corridors where we as an agency could prioritize capital dollars and where we could potentially move people in the future. However, again, we're only planning and we can only prioritize capital dollars. So that network connects with Broward and Miami-Dade counties who actually have passed local surtax, a funding source to match and pay the operations and maintenance for commuter rail, for other things, mobility services. So unfortunately, because we're federally funded, or not unfortunately, but we're federally funded, so we can't lead something like a ballot or a surtax. We can educate, we can tell people this is coming. We are built out. These 561 corridors, Okeechobee, you saw it. It's 9 lanes. There is no more widening. We can't take, that's the right of way we have. We can do different things within the right of way, but that's what we have. So to FDOT, they're like, you know, people are like, why is this road full? You're not doing your job. It's like, the road is at its max. What width? We can't, you know, you could say this road outside is, why is it so narrow? Well, are we going to demolish this building? No, like that's not the solution. So this is all a growing momentum, and the thing now that we're trying to educate, and through our long range transportation plan, that vision, trying to really get people to understand, we have to kind of pivot at this point. Hopefully we stop sprawling because people are kind of bottlenecked out west due to environmental constraints. We have the ocean, Everglades, we have grassy waters, we have things that if you're going to go further out west, you're going to be constrained by these natural areas, protected areas. The circles on the map, we understand that our 561 plan of these corridors that we envision frequent enhanced transit service, like every 5-10 minutes, is not something that could be done everywhere because we just don't have that density. But we also understand there has to be something in it for everyone. And even if we were to move those people and get cars out of the road in that network, what's in it for everybody else? Why would they vote for something, or why would someone be on board with this if there's nothing in it for them? So those are those conversations and those circles and these other communities of, well, how do we make this all really one connected system, even though we can only prioritize things for primarily the state system and capital and redoing and by helping to work with our partners who actually implement these things. What about everybody else? Is Palm Strand going to provide local circulators, or the city's going to have on-demand things that get you to that main network that connects to the rest of the region? That's kind of that mobility vision. What is it really that everybody wants? How much does that cost? How do we get there? Normally, there's political champions that help lead that discussion. It's a lot. It's a effort with education and other things, but that's kind of where we're at in the conversation. So exciting time, but change is hard. So we appreciate your help to help us continue to educate, and your time being here and learning more too.
So with that concludes my components in the presentation. So are there any questions about key initiatives, Vision Zero, Complete Streets, or the Mobility Vision and 561 plan? If not, happy to turn it over to Andrew to talk a little bit more about accomplishing this vision.
Okay, so Brian went through a lot of inspiring and exciting renderings of the future transportation system, but I don't think anything's as exciting as navigating the funding programs. So here's the diagram for how funding comes down from the different sources and then gets siphoned off to different programs that we have at the federal and state level and where those end up. So obviously it is complicated. There's a lot of strings attached to different funding pots. I'm not going to go through this at all. I'm going to keep it high level, but just to show give you an understanding of when you request sort of, when you have ideas about how we can accomplish projects, as staff, we're really trying to figure out how we can navigate this funding structure a little more easily to get projects funded. To break it down though, the main funding sources we have, you can lump them into federal, state, and local. We do have the toll system on the turnpike, which is a private funding source there with the state. And then there's also some private-public partnerships such as Brightline, where they are combining for some private funds in there as well. But the majority of the funding that you'll be seeing is from the federal government, and that's through our Federal Highway Trust Fund. This is allocated through those federal authorization acts that Melissa went over earlier. So most recent one was the bipartisan infrastructure law, the biggest investment we've had in transportation ever in the country. A lot of those are separated into both formal funding that we get as a TPA, formal funding that the state also gets, and then there's a lot of new competitive grant programs out there. So a lot of money gets siphoned off to different pots. Many of that now is available to locals, local jurisdictions, and to MPOs to go after more than ever. So that's nice to see. Next is the state funding. This is with the State Transportation Trust Fund. So similar to what the feds have set up for their trust fund. And so this gets allocated through the legislature. And then lastly, there's local funding. So this is funding that you all will see locally that gets put into your capital improvement programs that could also be used in other transportation plans that the locals have. So just briefly going through those three main funding sources when it comes to how they're spent and sort of what makes up the majority of those funds. The federal funds are mostly fuel taxes. So that's what you're paying per gallon at the pump. That's the main funding source when it comes to federal transportation funding. Other ones that are included, tire taxes, sales of vehicles, and vehicle heavy use taxes, but the majority is that fuel tax. And as you saw in the other graphic there, it really goes to a diverse eligibility. So a lot of it has to be spent on the federal aid highway system. There are exceptions to that, such as our Transportation Alternatives Program. There's money that also goes to public transportation through FTA. You can fund intermodal hubs and terminals and really any other transportation related facility. As I mentioned, it's formal funding, then there's competitive programs out there. And many times, a lot of this federal funds does require a match. A typical match is 20% with a local match. A unique system that we do have in the state of Florida that I wanted to mention is that the state matches all local funding for federal funds with what are called toll revenue credits. So we're already spending a lot of money at a statewide system, more than the federal government is giving us. So there's a agreement with FHWA when it comes to that match. So that's a really good benefit when it comes to our locals, and for us at the TPA to not have to always require that match for specific things, such as our transportation alternatives program. One thing to mention when you do put federal funds on a project is that it does federalize the project, right? So you're then required to go through all those requirements that it takes for a federal project. And there's a lot more involved in that when you want to say like red tape. So when you have your engineers and your local cities who apply to us for federal funds through the Transportation Alternatives Program or our local initiatives program, just a reminder that does federalize the product, and that can be difficult sometimes for definitely smaller municipalities to have to navigate that. For state funding, again, fuel tax is the main source. So this is another one that is paid per gallon of gas. And a lot of these initiatives goes towards the major state roadways within the state, especially on the strategic intermodal system. So that's really towards fostering economic development, improving mobility, and increasing intermodal capacity of those major roadways and then our major ports and hubs throughout the state. And then the additional funding from the state also goes towards their ongoing operations and maintenance of facilities, roadways, transit, traffic signals. And then there's also additional funds that could be used on other priorities that are identified on state roads. And that's ones that the TPA can put forward to FDOT to look for priorities to put on their facilities.
I have a question. In terms of state funding, do we have a lobbyist on that goes out after these monies? Like, how do you request it from? Like, how does it fit into the state, like federal, like the budget for Florida, for example?
Sure. So we are actually, the money that we're getting for our tip, it's like based on a formula. So it's not like we're having to fight for anything. It's based on population. We don't have, we're not allowed to lobby as a funding agency. We, with our funding, with our federal dollars. However, through the MPOAC, which is basically all the MPOs together that we pay into, we do have the director of the MPOAC is kind of our voice in Tallahassee. So, but we personally aren't trying to, we don't construct or do anything like that. So if we're not at this time, we don't have anything that we're like trying to go above and beyond into like other funding sources. We're prioritizing what we are sent to prioritize and based on population. Do you want to, I don't know, add on to that?
No, that's good. Right. So a lot of these state taxes, especially when it comes to the fuel tax, those are ones that are like, in a pot and they have those strings attached already. So for example, the state gas tax that goes in the Transportation Trust Fund, it's required to be spent in the district that it's collected, and they have to do their best effort to spend it in the county collected. So we're getting all of our state version of the gas tax back into the county, or at least into the district, if it's like major projects.
Mhm.
And then I wanted to point out that a lot of this is, these are ones that are already set up in legislation for requirements. So this isn't like something to go after when it comes to a congressional, like turkey line item. I shouldn't use that term. Like what's the federal term for housing? Appropriations. Yep. So these aren't like line items that you would submit to your legislators for general revenue funding from the state. This is ones, for the most part, strictly with the required pots of money.
Yeah, I think that one of the things, sometimes we get, well, two things. One, I believe our county is the one that has the highest gas tax in the state, right?
So there's
because there's a base and then there's like certain cents that go to certain things. So, right?
Yep. We have a pretty complicated structure of gas taxes when it comes to state and local ones. So there's obviously the federal one per gallon, there's state ones per gallons, but there's additional ones that the locals can levy, and there's multiple taxes that they can levy. I think we are one of the highest in the state. I'm not sure if we're the highest amount right now, but
We're,
one of the
yeah.
highest.
And so you might see like the gas when you is a little higher in our county than maybe when you go to Broward or Martin County. One thing that, and actually Vice Mayor Cruz went to the conference with Andrew, but one of the things that's being discussed at the MPOAC level and more at a higher picture level is like, now that more and more people are, less people drive, or if they all start driving electric cars and they don't need as much gas, how are we going to get the money if we're, getting money from for the roadways based on the fuel, the gas tax? So that's a conversation. So there's this kind of, they're piloting different things that maybe people would be charged based on the miles that they drive, or potentially tolls or other things, other ways to tax or do things so that if everyone tomorrow stopped using gasoline, how are we going to have money to improve the transportation system? How do we kind of charge the users for the system that they use? So currently a lot of that's the gas tax. Also, sometimes we get comments from the public that's like, these are our like tax dollars that you're not doing a good job with, and it's like, well, it's, it's not like it is, but it's also kind of a different type of system, because these dollars are coming from the state and federal government. As Andrew mentioned, some of these dollars are coming from people at the pump in this county that are collected, a small percentage of funds that go from that. And we are trying to prioritize in our transportation improvement program as much of the dollars. That's why we do a call for projects, is we want to oversubscribe. Recently, we have a long list of projects in the pipeline, and we think there'll be this much money available in the new outer 6 year. So give us ideas, because we want to have more ideas than less, because if something falls through, or if we don't have enough idea or projects that are ready to go, the District 4 for FDOT will say, well, you don't have anything to spend this money on. We're going to go do something in Broward or somewhere else in the district that actually needs the money. So we don't want that. We want to spend all the money that we collect in our county. And that's been some of the information that we've been trying to clarify. The Transportation Alternatives Program really is a separate grant that we prioritize. Those smaller ped bike grants are 3 years out. The local initiatives is something that we self-created as a way to call for projects. However, it's not like it's not like a grant. It's just like, we want ideas and we want projects that are ready to go. So our pipeline is full, and we use all the money that we can get, that we think we're going to get in this county. So we've been trying to educate people, because, for example, we do have some big projects coming up and the cost of everything has gone up. For example, most recently, the State Road 7 conversation, Atlantic Avenue widening, State Road 80 lighting, things like that are in the pipeline. But if they get delayed, the money has to be used in the year that it's in. And if not, then it goes, it has to, without avalanching everybody else who's in line, it has to go out into the new outer year, and it kind of takes the next spot. So other people that maybe were trying to get in line, we really want to be clear on, when we do a call for projects for that new outer year, you're not committed until you're in the tip. You're just like a desire that we're giving to FDOT, and then they're working it out. So I know it's a long-winded answer, but I'm just trying to explain we're trying to populate this to spend these dollars that we think we're going to get to prioritize for this county.
And so the last source, just briefly, is local funding. As I mentioned, for the most part, the federal and state projects, federal projects, we able to match that with a toll revenue credit. And so that covers that local match for federal funds when it comes to at least formal funds. But a few things for locals, again, fuel tax is really the main source of this when it comes to those local fuel tax options. So there's multiple ones for those. Other major sources would be in road impact fee. So more of a one assessed for developments. There's also infrastructure surtax is what we have here in the county. That's a sales tax. And then property taxes. So what you get through the general revenue fund. So for your local municipalities, that might make up a share of what you're spending towards your capital projects. And Valerie highlighted this. But when it comes to the gas tax, this is the source for all three of the main funding sources for federal, state, and local. There's been a lot of discussion about that declining revenue source over time based on increases in fuel efficiency. And so when you look at that, the data on that, obviously we're running out of things are getting more expensive, and we're really declining on the amount of revenue available for this. And so they're covering those budget shortfalls, for example, at the federal level, sometimes with general revenue funds, or that could be at other levels as well. So we're looking at potential options in the nation, and there's pilot products out there throughout the nation when it comes to different types of taxes into the future. One example, or just a few ways of doing that, there is the potential just to increase gas taxes. The federal one hasn't been increased since 1993. It could be a mileage-based user fee. So that's one that Vice Mayor Cruz and I both attended a conference down in South Florida that discussed more about that. So that's piloting it based on potentially looking at tracking you versus for your mileage, and then assessing a fee on that. And then an easier way that some places are doing throughout the country are potentially increasing registration fees or putting another fee on top of ones for electric vehicles. So you'll see more of this evolve through the future here. And the state will probably be looking to pilot something for a mileage-based user fee, maybe in some locations into the future. Here's an example of some of those new EV charging stations at one of the turnpike plazas. That looks like it's a FPL charger. My last slide for you all, we talked a lot about how products are funded, but really how are we funded as a metropolitan planning organization? And every metropolitan planning organization in the country, for the most part, is funded through federal planning funds from the Federal Highway Administration and the Federal Transit Administration. So that makes up the majority of our planning funds. I'd say up to well over 90%. This does require that 20% local match. That is covered by the total revenue credits, so that's great. And then we receive additional funds from the Florida Commission on Transportation Disadvantage. We talked about our LCB and some of the planning activities we do for that. So we get a portion of that towards transportation disadvantage planning. And then lastly, there is a member dues that we collect based on population of municipalities who are on our board. All right, I'll turn it over to public participation.
Thank you, Andrew. I know we just have a couple minutes left, so I'm going to try and get through these as quickly as we can. Just want to briefly go over public participation. I'll actually be presenting to you all next month about our public participation plan, as it's currently under public review, but just a brief overview of what that is. Our public participation plan is one of those other required documents that we have. So we do have the TIP, the LRTP, UPWP, but the public participation plan is also a required document for us to have here at the TPA. Essentially what it does is it just kind of establishes how we interact with the public, how we work to engage them with our transportation planning and get them involved in giving us feedback on what we're doing. Also giving you all feedback to share with us. So this includes everything about how we notice meetings, how we share information with the public, whether that's through our website, in the newspaper, on social media, or otherwise with the traditional news media. This is our first task in the UPWP and the strategic plan. So I like to think it's really important because it's the first task, but it is something that we do take very seriously here. We just updated this in January. Like I mentioned, it is under public review right now until your board meeting on March 16th. So if you have not already, please go ahead and take a look at that on our website. It's palmbeachtpa.org/PPP. And you can basically go through all of that, see if you have any feedback, as we'll be discussing that at the next board meeting. Really quickly, social media, we do manage several accounts, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. We have been putting a strong emphasis on increasing our followers and engagement on social media. So each month during your board meetings and your agenda backup, you do have the public involvement activity reports. And the way that we structure these is to show our progress on our strategic plan goals that are related to social media and to the news media. So the first two goals that you'll see are related to our social media impressions. So how many people are seeing what we post on social media every month. And then the other is how many followers do we have? So since July 2021, when we started tracking followers as part of our strategic plan, we've gained almost 2,000 followers. We'll definitely reach that by this June. We've already surpassed our goal for the fiscal year for followers. So we're really excited about that. And we've increased our average monthly impressions to a little over 31,000. We definitely know we can improve that more as well, but we're working to do that every day. And one of the ways we do that is by having you all share our content. I know some of you are really great about that, and we really, really appreciate that. And also on those public involvement activity reports is information about news media. So this is something we've also been trying to do a lot more at the TPA. We work really closely with our 3 local TV stations, 2 local newspapers within South Florida, as well as local radio stations like WLRM, the NPR station in South Florida, and some of those micro local publications that are out there as well. This is a really, really great way to tell the public about what we're doing. So some people get their news by reading the newspaper. Some people get it by going on social media. Some people get it by coming to public meetings. So we have to reach all of those people in different ways in order to get as many people involved as we can. So we've really been striving to pitch stories to the media, and that's been really, really helpful. We've been able to reach millions of people this year with that. So we're really proud of that and really excited about the progression that we've made in establishing those relationships with local reporters in our community. We do all kinds of engagement activities here at the TPA. We started doing mobile tours this year. The top right photo is of the mobile tour at the Brightline station in Boca Raton, which was a ton of fun. We had lots of great questions. And I have really enjoyed putting those together. Our next one is with Palm Tran and Tri-Rail on April 7th. So I would encourage you all to sign up if you haven't already. Very excited about that. We'll be riding both Palm Tran and Tri-Rail down to Delray Beach to see Palm Tran's facility, take a tour of that, see their electric charging facilities, things like that, and then head back up north. We do lots of tabling at our events, community events like green markets, things like that. We have workshops, as we've discussed here. We lead those workshops on all different kinds of topics, but Vision Zero, bicycling safety, economic development. We're having one on land use, complete streets coming up. So lots of different interests there. We use social media and our news media to engage the public. We have an annual Florida Bicycle Month ride, which gets a lot of our elected officials involved, as well as our transportation partners. That's on March 31st. Sign up for that if you haven't already. Walk to School Day is held every October. So typically we partner with a different school every year through the school district, and we work with Safe Kids Palm Beach County to do that. And then Bike to School Day is held in May. So that's always a really fun one to get out in the community and see what the kids are doing for that. And then Mobility Week is held, I believe that's beginning of November, end of October to beginning of November usually. And that one is a lot of fun. We've done bicycle rides and other outreach events, tabling at Tri-Rail and things like that. So our website, I think you all are aware of this. We've recently redesigned it. If you haven't checked it out, please do. palmbeachtpa.org. One of our main focuses was to improve ADA compliance so that more people can access our website, not just those who do it in a traditional sense. So whether you're using a screen reader, if you need, different types of adjustments for viewing the website, we really took a lot of time to make sure that that was done the way that it should be. This is where we share public meetings, events, resources. So please check it out. And then our resources page, palmbeachtpa.org/resources, has a lot of different things that you can use. I know a lot of you share these, but specifically our comment map is on there. Our traditional GIS map where you can go and look at projects within your municipality, performance measures, all that fun stuff. Please check that out if you haven't already. There's lots of great resources on that page.
Thank you so much, Melissa. I know we're up on time. I know some of you have to leave because it's past 11, but just to close it out. And again, if you have to leave, please provide Melissa your quiz. But we've mentioned we're part of this Miami urbanized area. There's a Southeast Florida Transportation Council. our chair Mayor Reed yesterday was selected as the vice chair of that council. It's 3 MPO board members, one from each of the chairs from each of the 3 MPOs of these 3 counties, Palm Beach, Broward, and Miami. We've mentioned we're growing. We're expecting about 40,000 people in the region per year over the next 25 years. So we're continuing to grow in this urbanized area. So that's kind of what we're looking at, this one connected region. We mentioned we have this 561 plan vision. We're looking at expanding that vision. How does that encompass the entire county? But also Broward has their Vision 2100 and Miami-Dade has their SMART plan. Both Broward and Miami are moving into implementation of their enhanced transit corridors because they have a local funding source. So we're moving along, but we're just up the street and continuing to work with them on that network. So that's it. I know we really took up the full time. We started a little late as well, but we really appreciate your time and your interest and your everything you do for us and for our county to advance transportation. So if you have any questions, we're always here to help, and please turn in your quiz. Thank you so much.